Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Really excited to have Marc Aixalà on the podcast today. Marc, it's been a while. I feel like we've been wanting to get you on the show for a long time, so I'm glad that this is happening. So welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Can you give the listeners a little bit of background on who you are and the work that you do?
Yeah, my original background is a telecommunication engineer. I studied and worked as an engineer for several years, but the psychedelic therapy and the use of non-ordinary states of consciousness for therapeutic purposes was a passion that I had since I was young. And then eventually I moved to psychology. I went to university again. So I trained in psychology, and then I trained also in Holotropic Breathwork, which is a non-drug technique that induces also a powerful non-ordinary state of consciousness. And I trained in that technique. Later on, I trained more in psychedelic therapy with maps and with compass. And I've been doing for 10 years now, worked in integration, as we call it now, for the ICEER Foundation and also in my private practice. So my background has been evolving over the last years, but it's always been related to non-ordinary states and their applications for therapeutic purposes.
Amazing. Thank you. I think we first actually came in contact. I don't know if you remember this, but it was back in 2016. And I think I just have known you from in the breathwork world for a while. But I was volunteering for MAPS at the time, managing their integration list. And sometimes we would have those calls every once in a while, all the integration providers getting on and be like, what is integration, right? It was like in the early days of it just kind of like forming and trying to figure out what is this thing. So
Yeah,
I'm curious.
Absolutely. The field of integration has been evolving over the last years, but back then the question of what is integration was something that definitely still needs to be answered. No, it's an ongoing question, what we understand as integration.
Yeah. So I'm curious, what is your definition of integration and how do you understand psychedelic integration?
When I'm asked to give a definition of psychedelic integration, I'm always trying not to give a simple kind of short answer. Yeah, I think that in a way we can start to understand what integration is by understanding when it happens. Yeah, so integration is a phase of the psychedelic experience. We know that there's the preparation, the session itself, and then integration. So on the one hand, we can define integration in this kind of time frame. Yeah, it's what happens when the experience finishes and afterwards. Yeah. But then, what integration is, what needs to be done during the integration phase, what happens there, that's something that's very difficult to really define because there's many different ways of doing it. No? So one of the ways I have tried to approach this problem of defining psychedelic integration is to define integration through different metaphors. And actually, in the first chapters of the book that I published, I addressed this question: what is integration? And I present 11 metaphors that depict different aspects of what psychedelic integration can be. Since the piece of the puzzle, like the psychedelic experience, is a piece of the puzzle that needs to be included in the older frame. But also a seed that grows. We plant a seed, and then integration is how we make the seed grow. So different metaphors that can illustrate different aspects of psychedelic integration.
Beautiful. I like the seed metaphor as well. That's something I always come back to. How have you seen, I guess, the field grow throughout the years? I mean, you said you've been doing this for about a decade. What have you noticed? What kind of trends have really kind of started to pop up in your world around psychedelic integration?
Yeah. The thing is that when I started doing this, we were not calling it specifically integration. We were still trying to understand what we were doing. So the way that I started practicing integration was in the framework of the ICEER Foundation, the International Center for Ethnobotanical Education, Research and Service. So I met with Ben Delonen, the founder. We met in different occasions, but we became more acquainted at Boom Festival 2010. Yeah, it is a psytrance festival that happens every 2 years in Portugal. We were both working at this psychedelic emergency service called Cosmic Care. So we were volunteers supporting people going through difficult psychedelic experiences. Then we learned more about each other's lives and projects and interests, and Ben asked me to collaborate with the foundation. At the beginning, my work was mostly writing content for the website. So I was just adjusting some text, creating new text for the website. And we saw that when the website was running, we started receiving emails from people asking different things. Yeah, people would ask about where should I go to drink ayahuasca. I've heard about ayahuasca. I want to have an experience. Where should I go? Yeah, people would also report questions like, I have diabetes, I have this and this illness or whatever. Is it safe for me to drink ayahuasca, or can I drink ayahuasca while on this medication? And we were answering these questions. I found myself in the position of answering those questions. I had a background in psychology and I knew about these things. I was not an expert, but I knew a little bit more than people that were contacting us. No? So, yeah, in a way, I started answering these emails that we were receiving, and more we received requests from people that had had difficult experiences with ayahuasca, with iboga, with psychedelics in general. And people were reporting, I've had this experience, and after the experience, it's become more challenging for me, or I was having some sort of challenges before, but now these challenges have increased, or I'm experiencing some anxiety, some insomnia, some depression after the experience. Yeah, can you help me? So I started working with these emails, answering these emails, trying to provide some reassurance, some support to these people. But we were not calling it integration yet. It was just us at the foundation becoming aware that there was this need. There were people that were having these struggles, and how to support these people. No? And then the way that I started learning to do integration was actually by doing integration and realizing that I didn't know how to do it. You know? I didn't know how to support people in many different cases. So then it's been a journey throughout the last decade of trying to learn more and more what things were helpful for different cases, for different situations. And that's been the journey. I have to say that my expertise in integration is mostly focused on people that are having difficult experiences. So I usually don't work so much with people that have had a good psychedelic experience and they feel that they can do the integration on themselves. My experience is more focused on people that experience some sort of challenges after that. Yeah, so that's my bias. And when I talk about integration, most of the times I refer to these specific situations because that's what I believe that people need the most. Most times when people have had a beautiful psychedelic experience, they feel that they find their own ways to integrate that. They don't go for a therapist, they don't pay integration sessions, yeah, because they don't feel the need. So I specialized in working with people when they feel this need after a challenging experience.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I was going to ask you, like, do you feel that all psychedelic experiences need integration? And, what I'm hearing too, you're kind of talking about like, what is integration? You have the preparation, the experiencing of this integration phase, but then do people need prolonged, I guess, like care or like having a coach or a therapist to work with?
Hmm. Well, I think that I have some sort of controversial opinion around this topic. Yeah, because you were asking me
Let's
for
hear it.
how how the field of integration has evolved. And one of the things that I've seen is that there's been more and more people practicing psychedelic integration. It's almost like we have created some sort of need. Now there's this narrative that you need to do something after the experience, otherwise it seems that you're wasting your time. Yeah. And I don't think that it's like that. I think that most of the times people we can do our own self-integration. Of course, that it's going to be better if we learn about it, if we somehow experience it with people that maybe have done it other times, if we do certain practices or we are directed into doing certain practices that can be helpful. But it is something that most of the times we can do it ourselves. Things like writing, journaling, painting, creating artwork, I don't know, meditating, walks in nature, this kind of stuff, sharing circles, this kind of activities can be done very much on our own or with peers. Yeah. So I don't think that there's the need for doing integration always, or for going with a coach or with a psychotherapist to do integration sessions. Do I think that it can be helpful? Yes, of course. Do I think that it's a must? No, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with creating new needs for people. No, one of the things that psychedelics show us, or for me, the main thing is that somehow healing is inside of us and growth is inside of us, and they teach us accountability, they teach us responsibility, and they teach us that we are the experts of ourselves. No, that our journey does not depend on an external person. So, in my way of practicing integration, I also want to honor that and do integration when it's needed, but not create an additional need for people
Yeah.
that don't have it.
Well, and hearing you say that, I wouldn't say that that may be controversial, but I would say maybe it's an issue with definition. Because what are we talking about when we talk about integration, right? Sometimes when I hear people talk about it, it's self-care practices or it's that short window right after an experience. Sometimes you hear it talked about more, it's like prolonged work, right, where maybe you are working with somebody to really take that wisdom or that download that you had and really kind of put it into action. And I think we're just dealing with a definition issue here for the most part. It's like, what are we doing here after the psychedelic experience? And I've definitely had clients that have reached out doing prep and then wanting integration work after sessions and then coming back and be like, wow, that was a really beautiful ceremony. I think I'm good, and thinking like, should I have more sessions with you after this, like, post session, call? And I'm thinking, well, I don't know. Do you need to, like, do you want to have another session? Does it feel meaningful to do that? Do you have, good stuff that you want to work on? And sometimes people are like, no, I actually just really appreciated the experience for what it is. And how do we honor that too?
Yeah, absolutely. No, no, I think that integration, whatever you do, it's going to happen. I mean, even if you don't do anything, that's also what you're doing for integration. No? So, integration doesn't mean that you have to talk with someone to do integration. If you just write about the experience, or you think about the experience, or you don't do anything about the experience, that's actually the practice that you're doing for integrating that experience. Yeah. So, yeah, definitely, and that's why I always like to differentiate between what is integration and what is psychotherapy, because sometimes these practices can become a little bit blurred. I think that the activities that we do in integration, they are focused on an event, which is the psychedelic experience, and everything that's talked about in those integration sessions should be focused on what happened on that experience and how to, I don't know, adjust that experience to our framework or whatever. But as soon as we start shifting away from that experience and start to talk about something else, maybe we're going into something that's psychotherapy and not integration. No? So, and why do I say that? I think that's helpful in the practical sense for therapists. No? In our support service, we usually provided from 5 to 10 sessions for people that were having difficult experiences after a psychedelic experience, and therefore we had limited time and resources. So then for us it was very important to understand, okay, when is integration going to end, or when is our intervention of integration going to end? That doesn't mean that the integration ends there, but what we aim to do with our integration practice is to support this person that's having some challenging times, help them recover the sense that they can do integration on their own, and then they continue with their own integration. No? So that's why for me, the my specialty has been to work with people that they feel that they need some support, that they need to do certain integration, but they don't know how to do it because they are experiencing anxiety, depression, intrusive thoughts, flashbacks. These kind of very hard situations that they feel that they cannot deal on their own. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I was just recording with some of the folks over at New Shama, which is a psychedelic wellness center focusing on ketamine, and they were saying that they use coaches for the integration. And I was asking them, what does that look like? And they were saying that the coaching or that integration is really going back to the experience, and then once it starts to maybe get more into biographical narratives of like, oh, this thing about my mother, right? That starts to maybe go back into the psychotherapy realm, and maybe having that person find that psychotherapy resource, but always kind of coming back to like, what happened during the session, right? And really just working in those post sessions on that experience. And then if it starts to go outside of that a little bit more, it's like maybe you do need extra support, and find a psychotherapist or some other person to work with.
Yeah, in the end, I think that integration also has the function of creating bridges between the experience and our life. And our life might mean the past, the present, or the future. No? But yeah, to make the experiences relevant and meaningful in our life. So then we create these bridges. People can continue drawing from that experience and use whatever insight, whatever information into their daily lives. So I think that that's the aim of integration. I always like to differentiate between two main scenarios. One is when the experience has been positive and helpful and beautiful and easy. And so then I call that scenario maximizing benefits. And what kind of practices can we do to maximize the benefits that we perceive after a psychedelic experience? And the other scenarios, that what I was telling you, that I'm more specialized on, which is dealing with complications, dealing with adverse reactions. Yeah. And I think that the integration approaches are actually very different from one scenario to the other scenario. When we're talking about maximizing benefits, most of the times with maybe these self care practices, journaling, painting, all that, that is most of the times enough. Yeah. Also, the activities that happen after the ceremony, like the sharing circles, maybe you have an interview with the main facilitator or whatever. Yeah. With that, usually is more than enough. When people have experienced challenges, my experience tells me that they need a more sort of intensive intervention. And then that looks a little bit more like therapeutic interventions, in which there's a more directed sort of process that has the aim of making those uncomfortable symptoms disappear or become again under control. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you approach challenging experiences? Like, do you have a framework that you work with? Obviously, it's probably so different based on the individual and what somebody has experienced. But yeah, do you approach it from a framework perspective? Do you have any certain techniques or interventions that you typically rely on when it comes to these challenging experiences?
Mm. That's actually been the work of this last decade. Yeah, when I started working, it was more like, okay, let's see what happens here. Let's see what the person needs. Let's see what do I do here. No? Um, but then, as time continued and we were receiving more and more cases in the support service, one of the things that I did was at the end of each year go through all the emails that we had received regarding integration. And then I was reading and trying to analyze what kind of challenges people were experiencing, trying to see, are there different profiles of people that feel that they need support in integration. I was trying to find some sort of common denominators, some sort of common cartography to understand a little bit more what kind of situations make people feel that they need support. Yeah, and then with that, I created what I call a cartography of the adverse reactions after a psychedelic experience, and that's actually one of the chapters in the book is actually about that, to describe what different profiles people show when they ask for integration. Yeah? And there's different, like 7 of them, but not 100. So the challenges that we can run into, they are relatively similar. Of course, each of us will experience it in our own personal way, but the kind of problems that happen can be understood and described in general terms. And then my work has been how to support these specific scenarios, because I realized some 7 years ago that although I was understanding some of the things that were happening, for example, people experiencing a high degree of anxiety after a psychedelic session, or having flashbacks or insomnia or intrusive thoughts, people having panic attacks in the middle of the night after an ayahuasca experience for weeks or for months afterwards. Although I could understand what happened there and what was happening, I didn't have tools to work with that. I could not offer an integration therapy or an integration intervention that would help to make that situation better. So then I was looking for different resources in many different schools of therapy. And what I came at the end with is some sort of protocol or manual or idea of how to intervene in these 7 different scenarios that I described. So yeah, I do use a certain structure, but of course it's not like this behaviorist sort of protocol, no? That you do
Yeah,
this, this, and that.
right.
But there's general ideas on how to support these different profiles. Yeah,
Yeah, the map doesn't always describe the territory, right? But at least
absolutely.
it's
Yeah.
helpful to have a map to figure out what to do when you get to that place. What are some of those scenarios that you mentioned? You said there's 7 of them.
Yeah. So of course, these scenarios are for learning purposes. It doesn't mean that they are completely separate and independent scenarios, but they will give an idea of what happens and why people get into challenges after psychedelic experiences. The first one, and very common, I would say common in all scenarios, is the lack of preparation. People that have not received proper preparation, or they don't know where they are going, they don't know the kind of substance, kind of experience, the context, the dynamics that are going to be happening there, and that can lead to all sorts of problems. Yeah. Another very common profile is what I call the unresolved difficult experience. That is someone that during the experience gets in touch with a challenging emotion, can be fear, can be sadness, can be anger, can be grief, anything. Yeah. And what happens is that during the experience, we are not able to process that. We're not able to resolve that experience. So when the experience finishes, we finish with somehow our lens tainted by that emotion. So then I remain in contact with that fear or with that anger or with that sadness, and that accompanies me in my daily life. Yeah, and then people complain that okay, it's not that I am in an acute sort of emergency, but I feel in touch or I'm thinking a lot about that experience. Yeah, and that's one of the most common situations. Another situation is the same thing, but you turn up the volume very much. I call that a very traumatic experience with dissociation, and that looks like during the experience as a psychotic break. Sometimes people say I had a psychotic break on ayahuasca. They didn't have a psychotic break because they are not behaving psychotic at the moment, but they lost control. They, I don't know, they were in extreme fear. They behaved in a very weird way. They attacked people maybe during the experience, and people in those cases sometimes they report having strong panic attacks the weeks after the experience. Yeah, and all sorts of very incapacitating symptoms. So that's maybe one of the worst scenarios. Another one I call repeated intakes without integration. That's somehow a new trend in which people go from experience to experience. Yeah, I have 2 ayahuasca experiences this weekend, and then in the middle of the week I go for this ecstatic dance, and then next weekend I do a temazcal and a psilocybin experience, and then I do some breath work, and then the next week some MDMA to integrate all these experiences. No, and people are permanently on this flow of experiences, which for a time can work okay, but for some people, sometimes that starts making things uneasy. Yeah, they start to lose touch with their everyday reality, and they worry more about transpersonal, energetic entities, this sort of experiences, and it can become something that starts making them lose touch with reality in a quite clear way. Another scenario is the emergence of a traumatic memory. So people that under the effect of psychedelics, all of a sudden they have the realization, oh my God, I was abused by that person when I was a child and I didn't know that had happened. Yeah, but is it true? Is it not true? No. So this creates a lot of discomfort in trying to decide if this is true, should I do something? If it's not true, why am I seeing this? Yeah, and usually people are very stressed and or under a lot of distress, no, when they experience these situations. Another event, another scenario, is people with prior psychological disorders. People that have had, I don't know, depression or manic episodes or any kind of psychological disorder before, and through the use of psychedelics, sometimes it can become they can become more unstable. No, the symptoms become stronger again. Another source of problems, which is really sad, is the problems with facilitators or with shamans. So things that happen in the interpersonal domain, be it abuse or neglect or malpractice, lack of experience, anything that happens in the domain of the relationship between the client and the shaman, the therapist, or the facilitator. Yeah. Um, yeah. So these are the main profiles that I describe, and then I describe also a way to deal with them in a integration practice.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all that. Super helpful. I'm wondering, as you're describing some of that, I was wondering, do you incorporate any of like the Graphian framework being trained in holotropic breathwork to try to like understand some of this stuff? So thinking about like the archetypal nature of the birth process and how that could possibly be playing an effect. Not that the birth process is, but just kind of like those archetypal themes that play out in each of those stages.
Hmm. Well, definitely the Graphian framework has had a huge impact in the way that I practice and the way that I work, because I've been trained in holotropic breathwork, and I became trained in holotropic breathwork because I found graph theories and ideas very attractive. No? I have to say, though, that my integration practice is not based on a transpersonal framework, so to speak. It's more, and that was a process for me. How should I position myself from a philosophical point of view or from an ontological point of view as a psychedelic integrator? Should I use the Grothian mindset? Should I use a psychoanalytical mindset? Because truth is that a lot of the clients that psychedelic integration therapists have, they come from many different backgrounds. You have people that they drink ayahuasca in Shipibo tradition, or some people drink with the Santo Daime. Some people use psychedelics from a Western approach. Some people might be, I don't know, agnostics or atheists or Christians. So some people might be fully into psychoanalysis or into growth. Some other people might deny completely those theories. So, as a therapist, how do you position yourself ontologically? And then I found it very useful to learn about this theory that's called constructivism, the philosophical constructivism, which can say that there is not a single reality, or there is not one reality. Each person will live in our own reality. So, in a way, the work of the psychedelic integration therapist is to understand the reality of that person. So, if that person works with the Shipibo framework, maybe it's not going to be helpful to come with a Grothian perspective and say, no, it is not because of this, it's because of the third perinatal matrix. Yeah, that's going to be a clash of paradigms, which you don't want that to happen. Yeah. So then all these traditions like or worldviews like the Grothian, for example, those are maps. But again, we don't have to confuse maps with reality or even our maps with other people's maps. No? So when designing my theoretical corpus, my theoretical um, theory of how to practice integration, I try to look for a philosophical way of positioning the therapist in a more neutral space in which you can have your own beliefs, but when you're working with someone else, you try as much as you can to understand the worldview of that person and to work from within, from inside that worldview. Yeah.
And I think that's important. Somebody shared a story one time about somebody needing integration after an ayahuasca experience, and the person was pulled out one of Groff's books and was like, you went through this birth process, right? This is the experience. And it was like traumatizing to that person, right? They're like, that's not what my experience was. And it feels that like we as psychedelic practitioners, integration therapists, coaches, to kind of have an eclectic kind of background to kind of like to understand people, right? To kind of have lots of those maps and really figure out where the person is and what's their language, what's their narrative around it. Which got me thinking. I was going to ask you before, just thinking about, how does the West deal with this when a lot of people are, say, experiencing some of these experiences in more of a shamanic container, going down to Peru and taking, ayahuasca in a Shipibo container, and then coming back to, Western civilization where it's like, much different kind of cosmology to live in. And, it's like, how do we bridge those two together? Or do they even need bridging? I don't know.
That's a very good question, and I don't know if I have an answer for that. but definitely it's something to think about, no? Because some people do struggle because of this clash of cosmologies. Yeah, if I go down to Peru and I partake in a ceremony in their certain cosmology, that's okay, but I come with a certain cosmology of my own. No? So if I try to push this new information into my cosmology and it doesn't really fit, what do we do there? No, there seems to be a work in translating the experiences. That's why I believe in most of the retreat centers that you find nowadays in Peru, you have the shamans who are the curanderos, no? They orchestrate the ceremony, they do the interventions, but then you have the facilitators that usually are Westerners that can help people give some sort of more Western framework how to hold those experiences. No? Definitely, it is a challenge, and I think that that's why for me it's never been easy to go into other cosmologies. No, as interesting as I can find, no, and rich is to have an experience outside your cosmology. I consider myself a Westerner, no, and I think that my cosmology goes in that direction. So I've been more interested in how to create Western approaches to understand these experiences, rather than having to how I say that to take from other traditions, no, that sometimes can be not so helpful and can be a little bit confusing for people. And then that's an added challenge, is that in those cosmologies they they don't talk so much about integration because those practices are already an integral part of their tradition. So things have not to be explained because people know. Yeah. So if you believe, if you're part of that belief system, many things don't need to be integrated because they are already integrated in the social cosmology that you share with other people. But for us, it's like we're having experiences that for us are completely out of the ordinary, experiences that they don't belong anymore to the industrial Western civilization. So when you talk about mystical experiences, when you talk about, I don't know, strong emotions that come up or from your unconscious or whatever, we don't really have a language to understand that on our daily lives. So there's like these different layers of translation, no? From the indigenous cosmology into the Western, and then from the Westerner into our social cosmology, which doesn't really accept or include so much these experiences. So yeah.
What you mentioned around these experiences being integral, say, to that, Shipibo tradition. This is something that my teacher Lenny has brought up a few times, just around this concept of integration. And he comes more from like Greek philosophy, but just saying, the Greeks lived in an animistic culture, and they didn't separate that when they had experiences, right? And so now we're really dealing with the issue of Descartes, and we live in this split, right? And so the issue with integration is saying that there is something out there to integrate. So we're already separating ourselves from that experience, versus this experience is integral part of our life, and we live in a cosmology that can really accept that and hold that. We don't need to separate and say it's outside of us, right? It's part of
Mm.
us. And I don't know, maybe that's an issue of the West, that we just continue to split things and externalize it outside of ourselves, instead of saying this is part of who we are as humans, and
Mm.
this is a normal experience that we can have. And
Yeah, absolutely. And when defining integration, no, you were asking me at the beginning what integration is. Besides giving these 11 metaphors, I also talk about different dimensions in integration, from the cognitive, emotional, behavioral, physical. But I also include the social dimension of integration, because it's not the same to integrate this kind of experience, as you were saying, in a Shipibo tradition or in a Shipibo society than in the West. No? And we are products of our society as well. And we need to understand that these experiences, one of the challenges to integrate them is that socially we don't have the container to support these experiences. We're trying to create that, no, and it's becoming easier and easier. Now you find like certain communities, integration circles. You can talk about this more and more open, no, but for a few, since not long ago, you could not really talk about that. There was not really a group that could hold that experience. And one of the things that as a therapist you see is that in order to hold experiences in non-ordinary states of consciousness, you need a community. It's very difficult to do this journey on your own if you don't have people that somehow are on the same path, people that you can talk with. No? So the social dimension of integration is something that we definitely need to continue working on. No, as these therapies become more mainstream and the access to psychedelic plants or psychedelic substances becomes wider, we need to have also a social container that can include these experiences as part of a normal Western healing, therapeutic, spiritual life. No, so
Yeah, this is something I've been bringing up on the podcast throughout the years of it, it feels like we're building the scaffolding and the foundation of psychedelic therapy, but I also am more interested in what that safety net looks like. And I think you're pointing at more of that kind of societal container, right? Because we can have these really big experiences. And as you're saying, people can have very challenging experiences and then they come back and don't know where to look. And that is going to be the reality of the psychedelic renaissance, is that there will be quote unquote fallout of people having really challenging experiences and culturally not maybe being able to contain that. And then where do people go? Where do they find those supports? I feel like it's a lot easier nowadays. When I was in the depth of it, I had nowhere. I was like, who do I look to? Thankfully, I came across Groff, and I said, "Oh my God, this is this guy saved my life just by reading his book." But then being able to find the community. But back then you couldn't go online and type in psychedelic integration circle. It just didn't exist back then.
yeah.
But
Hmm.
yeah, so thinking about the cultural container, how do we create that, and thinking about that safety net for people?
And I think it's becoming more and more necessary because we may have the experience that it's becoming easier, like socially easier to talk about this. But I think that most of us that share this perspective are still some privileged people that maybe have been in this community for a while, that we've traveled to conferences, that we've been part of, I don't know, dietas in Peru with people that you know, or holotropic breathwork workshops. But what's happening now is that people that have nothing to do with this world, this community, they've never been interested in psychedelics, they are becoming interested in them because they've been suffering depression for 20 years or anxiety or whatever. And all of a sudden they start to hear that, all right, there's a new treatment here. There's MDMA, there's psilocybin. No, some people, they know what they're looking for, even if they don't really cannot even say the word. No, I heard about something that magic mushrooms have, no, and I want to have that experience. I want to use that for healing my depression. Yeah. So these people, for them, there's not yet a community, because they don't go to workshops, they don't go to retreats. No, they are
Right.
people that they are concerned about their psychological health. Most of the times, they're people that are maybe not even sophisticated in psychological terms of looking into this anthropological aspect of the use of psychedelics for healing. No, these people that they've tried antidepressants, they have not worked, they are in a vulnerable situation, and they heard about psychedelics. So we also need to think about people that have not yet entered this community, but they will need support. We need to create a safe container for them as well.
Yeah, and what do you think that support or framework looks like? Like, I don't know if you've thought about it, or yeah, what could this look like?
Hmm. Well, at the ISOS Foundation, we've always been interested in developing what we call safer practices. Yeah, so there's many different ways of practicing psychedelic medicine or plant medicine, and we're not really interested in saying what needs to be done or how needs to be done. What we are interested is like to understand what can we do to increase the safety of these practices. Yeah. So on the one hand, I think that those of us that are part of this community and have a role in this community, our role is to, as much as we can, increase the safety of all the practices. So people are more informed, people have more knowledge. The facilitators, the retreat centers, the shamans, they can offer better practices, no, and then we have more and more people that can offer integration if that's needed. No, and that doesn't mean people that are already from the psychedelic community. That means maybe training or letting the general public or the general medical establishment to know a little bit more about psychedelics, to support psychologists that they are not so interested in working with psychedelics, but that they might have clients that use psychedelics. So if we can expand this knowledge, if we can expand this network so people can talk more freely with their GP or with the psychologist about the ayahuasca experience that they had on the weekend, I think that that would be already a step. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think, well, it's interesting, just thinking about the privilege of being a therapist, coach, a medical person. You kind of hear a lot of these perspectives that you don't always hear in the news articles, right? I'm just thinking, you're getting tons of emails from ICEERs and you're able to search through, this archive of emails and start putting together like what are the most challenging things people are dealing with. And sometimes you don't get to hear that, but you get to hear that when people are reaching out. And I think a lot of people aren't really prepared to deal with that in, say, those professions where they haven't been exposed to a lot of this literature, right? Like I've definitely gotten some clients over the years of saying, I have a really great therapist, but they just don't understand what this whole psychedelic thing is about. And I just need somebody that can like understand this language. And so, yeah, I think to help to normalize it and create that safety net is getting everybody on board. I always like to say, creating some psychedelic literacy within professional fields. I remember, when I was very young, going to the doctor or therapist, talking about my experience and just feeling just so a lot of shame around it, and then being like, who do I reach out to now? Like I can't talk to anybody about this stuff. And so yeah, I think we do need to create more psychedelic literacy in all these fields. So yeah, even if people aren't interested or don't want to partake, right, at least just having an understanding that this is starting to become mainstream and people are starting to kind of take their quote unquote healing into their own hands by getting exposed to the potential of these medicines.
Yeah, and I also want to bring the like the other aspect of it, or the dark aspect of that. No, that nowadays, because this is becoming mainstream, there seems to be some sort of need of only presenting the bright aspects of psychedelics. No, you take psilocybin once and your depression is gone away. You take MDMA once and PTSD disappears. No, and of course that for some people it's going to be like that, but for many people will not be like that. No, we cannot pretend that psychedelics will work for everybody. Same as antidepressants don't work for everybody. They work for some people, they don't work for other people. Psychedelics might be the same. No, so I think that we could really do a favor to the whole field if we are not over enthusiastic about this. No, and we try to just go to the facts and practice this therapy, or this, I don't know how you want to call it, or this path in a professional way, to try to increase the quality, to increase the knowledge, to increase the best practices that we can, to offer a better service for people that come to experience this modality, but without pretending that this modality is going to be the only one, or that this is going to be the solution for everybody. Because otherwise, what happens is that we create a culture of competition, and then you have different schools, different clinics, that they want to differentiate themselves from another clinic, and then you get into this marketing competition, and who we offer ayahuasca with bufo, with cambo. It's almost like the more the better. It seems that we need to give miracles to people, and I don't really agree with that. I think that we could benefit from slowing down a little bit more, and yeah, and trying to do things in a good way. I always am a little bit scared when people, after one or two psychedelic experiences, they want to start providing psychedelic experiences for other people.
Yeah.
I can understand this falling in love stage with psychedelics. I can understand the passion to want to contribute, but you wouldn't become a car mechanic after repairing your, or just driving your car. So it's
Right.
a different thing. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important message. Just thinking about like how long did it take you to get like holotropic breathwork certified, right? And how long and how in depth was that training for you? How long does it take anybody to train in a professional field, right? It takes a while. And yeah, I think we do need to, and yeah, we do need to be more honest, right? And I think this also comes back to you listening too, right? If you're a therapist, you're a coach, you're doing all this stuff, kind of really reflect if you've had some of your own experiences that were really challenging throughout the years, and not just think about the peaks that we post on Instagram. What about the valleys that we aren't always posting, right? Because there's a lot of stuff that's happening on the descent and in those valleys. And I think the more honest we are about that, again, we can normalize bad, quote unquote, challenging bad trips, right? And I don't know if you've experienced this as a therapist, but I've definitely had people reach out for psychedelic integration and then starting off with, I don't want to sound crazy, or I don't really know how to talk about this, right? And so there still is, I think, a taboo and stigma around some of the transpersonal phenomenon that can occur because of this like stigma of feeling crazy. Even though you took a substance, you're reaching out for support, there's still a little bit of that hesitancy of, what do I share with this person? Like, do I tell them that I had an entity encounter and they, possessed my soul and, X, Y, and Z happened? That sounds a little crazy. How do I talk to about this to somebody I'm reaching out to? And so I think that fear still exists too. And
Mhm.
how do we become more open about
Yeah, and if you
seeing
allow
this
me,
happen?
I think that this is a risk that we're facing even inside the community, because the way that psychedelics are being presented now in the West as medicines with science behind, that they go to certain receptors and they influence certain, I don't know, we talk in scientific jargon, but what's happening is that we, from the scientific perspective, it's not so welcome if people talk about certain things. No, what about the transpersonal approach, for example, is being left behind by the modern research, no? Because somehow it's not scientific, it's kind of hippie sounding, new agey, and we don't want to include that into science. No? But by doing that, we're also creating a bias in what can be talked about and what cannot be talked about. No? So I think that the problem with that is if we try to make psychedelics fit one shoe. Yeah, if we try to make psychedelics be just medicines or psychiatric medication or sacraments, psychedelics can be much more than just one person could define. No, we have recreational uses, we have medical uses, we have pharmacological uses, we have scientific uses to understand how the brain works. So we have shamanic uses. So there's many ways to understand psychedelics. But when we try to reduce them and see them just from one perspective, then we are leaving behind many other ways of understanding the phenomenon, and also to create a richer practice. Yeah, and yeah, I think that we one way that we can solve this is by creating different profiles, different jobs, different careers, if you want. Because I do think that you don't need to be a shaman in order to support someone in a psychedelic experience in a clinical trial. I think that you can
Right.
train psychedelic therapists in a relatively short time, considering that they are already therapists, that they have a training in dealing with people. Okay, you can do a training that maybe it's 6 months, something like that, and you can do a pretty comprehensive training that will involve theory and practice. Yeah, but we shouldn't say that someone that does that is a shaman. A shaman probably works in a different way, with a different cosmology, with a different way of intervening there. So I think that there's room for different professions here. There's going to be a ceremonial use of psychedelics. There's also going to be a clinical use of psychedelics. There's going to be also a recreational and psychonautic use of psychedelics, if you want. That people will gather together and they will orchestrate the ceremony on their own. So there's different ways of approaching that. So when deciding who is skilled enough, or who is the person that should be conducting psychedelic sessions, then we need to think about the context in which we're going to be using that. No? And what seems now is
Yeah, I think
that psychiatry wants to get a hold on psychedelics, but there are other uses that are not psychiatric uses of psychedelics. So.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I think that's so important, and something we definitely bring up here a lot at Psychedelics Today is just the understanding and appreciating the different use contexts, because it diversifies the ecosystem, and we need that, right? If we just have one kind of dominant, way of doing things, it kind of starts getting into like monoculture a little bit, and we may not all agree with the different practices, but there's some people out there that really benefit from, say, more of this neo shamanic like container, and maybe that's what they really want, right? Some people do need a very clinical, heavy, kind of trauma focused container to work through whatever they're going through. And so, how do we pull back maybe some of our biases and try to understand and appreciate the landscape and the ecosystem, and say, you know what, somebody out there may need this, right? I think this is what this project has really taught me over the years, how diverse it is. Like when we say the psychedelic community, it's like, what is that, right? You have like so many different kind of like, different groups of people working on so many different projects. And, it's interesting, like Joe and I mean, Joe comes from a different background than I do. Like, he kind of came more from the festival world, has a philosophy, and we align on the breath work. I came more from the transpersonal and mental health counseling field with some spirituality and kind of shamanic training. And I always kind of approach this stuff more from a more intentional perspective, and saying, oh, it needs to be done in this right container, and this is how you properly do stuff. But, talking to so many different people over the years, it's really gotten me to appreciate all these different use contexts and be like, wait a minute, like, what's my bias here? Why am I judging this person for how they're using this substance? Sounds like they're getting really great benefit of dancing at a concert all night on MDMA and socially connecting with their friends on a deeper level. Why am I saying that that's a bad way to doing it? So I think we have to just be like, have a little bit of self-reflection and like try to understand our own biases at time. We do need diversity here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's the richness and the beauty of psychedelics and the psychedelic experience is that it cannot be understood from just one prism. No, it's a transdisciplinary approach, what will give us a more subtle understanding of different dimensions included there. No, I don't think that there's one way that is better than the other of using psychedelics. As I don't think that there's one shamanic tradition that is better than another shamanic tradition. No, I mean, things are there for a reason, and we find what resonates more with us. What I do think is that inside of or within each of these traditions, you can become more proficient or less proficient. So I'm sure that inside the Shipibo tradition, you can have like really good Shipibo curanderos and really ethical and really professional and really skilled, and some people that are just charlatans. Same thing with psychiatrists. Totally. You can find a really good psychiatrist that like committed to the work, knowledgeable and all that, and you can find someone that's there just for the money. So I think that that's really what makes the difference, like how to increase our knowledge, our efficiency, our capacity to support within the different frameworks. Even the recreational setting, you can throw a party and just give drugs to people, or you can have a drug checking system with, harm reduction initiatives and all that, and that's a way of increasing the best practices and to care for the whole community that decides to partake in this specific context.
Yeah. And how do the communities kind of hold the people accountable, right? Just thinking, there's this charlatan within this community. Like, how do you hold that accountable? Because I think that's where a lot of these dangers are coming from, right? And I think we've heard this within the past few years, especially just how we're like, oh, this is happening in the psychedelic world. Happens in every field, right? We're not special. Psychedelics don't always, make everything magical and healing and perfect, right? It's messy. It's very messy work, and it's going to add actually probably more complexity, if anything, to whatever community you're part of. I see that we have about like 10, 15 minutes left. I know we wanted to chat a bit about training, but something you said made me write down the question, thinking about training and who's qualified. I know this is the controversial question here. People have lots of different opinions. If you're trying to practice psychedelic integration, therapy, coaching, you want to be a psychedelic sitter, guide, therapist, whatever you're trying to do you need to have your own experience?
Okay, that's the million-dollar question. No, I think that again the answer depends on which context things are going to be happening. And as you know, I come from the holotropic breathwork tradition, and in this graph model, it's understood that the facilitator the therapist, no, the professional needs to have gone through his or her own process with holotropic breathwork. Same as with psychoanalysis. To become a psychoanalyst, you need to have done your own psychoanalysis, which involves lots of hours of therapy. Besides learning the theory and all that, you have to go through your own therapy. Yeah. So usually I would have answered this question from this perspective. Yes, you do need an extensive experience with non-ordinary state of consciousness to support someone in non-ordinary state of consciousness. Lately, I have different answers for that. I would say that in the context of a clinical trial, I am not so sure that therapists need that on a mandatory level. No? I've been surprised to meet people in clinical trials that they've never had a psychedelic experience, or they have had very few psychedelic experiences, and they turn out to be excellent psychedelic therapists. They could do a fantastic preparation, they could hold the space for the person with impeccability, and they were able to deliver the integration sessions within the model of the clinical trial. So with that, I was convinced that this can be done. And I would have these people as seaters for my experience. No? So if one of these person would say, hey, you have a psychedelic experience and I will sit for you, I would feel safe. Yeah, so I think that there's the possibility of training people, but that doesn't mean that it's easy. Maybe not everybody will have the natural talent to support people in a non-directive way, in a supportive way, in a kind way. You know? But I think that it can be done. Something different is someone practicing shamanism or something similar to that, or someone offering holotropic breathwork workshops or psychedelic retreats, things like that, no? In which you're positioning yourself in a more in a position of authority in a way. People will look up to you, yeah, because you are the trainer, you are the organizer of the workshop, you are the shaman, you are the, you know. So when you position yourself in this role, I think that you need many things to begin with. You need an extensive process, no, and a process that is not only that I've taken psychedelics 100 times, but that I've had my process under supervision. There was someone that knew more than I do, and somehow supported me through my blind spots and helped me to move forward my main issues. No, because otherwise, what happens is that we find people stumbling against the same old problems of power, sex, and money. You know, and this is sometimes what happens in the inside of certain communities that use psychedelics, or certain therapies, or certain people that organize psychedelic sessions. They end up having behaviors that are not ethically correct, no? And they have to do with not having a community or a supervisor or a mentor that will point out where they are making mistakes, and maybe having not worked through their own blind spots in regard of these hot areas. You know, so I would say that in the medical model, if you want to provide a limited amount of psychotherapy in non-ordinary states, the client coming, doing 2-3 sessions of preparation, one psychedelic experience, 2-3 sessions of integration, that will be done in the medical model. And these people, I think that with a relatively short training, they can do an acceptable job. They will not be shamans, they will not be, but they don't need to be. No, they just need to be good technicians and good people, you know, and have the right motivations. For all the people organizing more extensive trainings and experiencings and running retreat centers and this kind of stuff, I think that then things start to be a little bit more complex. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting question. When talking about clinical studies, I guess you're even taking consideration the bias that you're bringing into the room, and maybe actually people that don't have experience, you know, you get maybe like a cleaner slate to some degree. Maybe not, you know, and
Yeah.
I guess you can have
Well,
that
if
bias
I
that
could
this isn't going to
choose,
work.
yeah, if I could choose, I would prefer that every single therapist has had at least, I don't know, 2-3 psychedelic experiences, which actually was what happened back in the 70s when Groff and all the people were supporting people. They had a relatively short training, you know, but they had some experience. So I think that it can add an incredible value, you know, to have gone through your own experiences and to be in the role of the client. I think it's very important because otherwise it becomes easy to jump into this role of the expert. I'm the psychedelic therapist. I'm holding space for people. Well, yeah, but how easy is for you to go and be held by someone? It touches something vulnerable space inside of us, and I think that we need to be in touch with that definitely.
Yeah, yeah. So you said you've been getting a lot of emails recently, people reaching out about like how to get involved in different training programs. I know there's lots popping up. We have our own. Any insight? Like what should what should people be looking for? And what are some of your responses when people do reach out with that question?
Yeah, when people ask me that, honestly, it's very difficult to give a good answer, and most of the times I don't really know what to say to people. On the one hand, my answer depends on what they are looking for. So some people want to really get some sort of qualification, some sort of certificate that will allow them to practice psychedelic therapy. To which, what I respond is, I don't know if there's any. I don't know if any training that exists nowadays will allow you to do this, what you're looking for. Probably if you do the MAPS MDMA training, you are going to be able to work within the MAPS MDMA assisted therapy programs. Yeah. If you get trained in the Compass training for psilocybin, maybe you're going to be able to work there. But besides that, I don't know what these qualifications will be useful for. No? So I think that people should know that, and people offering these trainings should also be open and saying, hey, what we're doing here is a training, but it's not official. We cannot guarantee that you're going to be allowed to practice this. No? It's going to depend on many different factors. So that's the main thing. And I think that people offering training should be honest about this. Yeah. And
Yeah.
then the second thing is about the quality of the training. It's like, okay, what do you want to learn? If you want a certificate, I don't know what to answer, but what do you want to learn? Do you want to learn about the history of psychedelics, the chemistry of psychedelics? You want to learn about research, about the scientific findings? Do you want to learn to create workshops to support people in non-ordinary states of consciousness? What do you want to learn? No? And for me, but this is again my personal bias, I don't know any better training for learning actually to do the work during the session itself, the psychedelic session or the breathwork session, than the growth transpersonal training model. That's where you get a lot of practice. You are supporting people since day one, and you get a work that it's not theoretical at all, but it's extremely practical, and that has to do with doing your own breathing sessions and also being supported and then learning how to do the job. And what convinced me of the use of this modality was when I went to Boom Festival and this psychedelic care service, which I felt pretty comfortable, if one can use that word, with the cases that we attended there. No, at Cosmic Care, you see people that have taken lots of psychedelics in high doses. You see really challenging experiences. And I felt that the training that I had received in that model of growth transpersonal training was really, really helpful. So for me, that's the best training to know how to do the things during the moment. If you want to know about the science, about theory, about psychedelic history, about therapy schools, then other trainings might be better. No? So in the end, I think it depends on what you want to do and what do you want to do with this. If you want to make a living out of the training that you're going to be attending, then you need to maybe think of what's going to happen after you finish. No? But yeah, it's a complex situation because there's more and more trainings appearing, and the training itself, and that's something that sometimes happens in therapy trainings, has become a business in itself. The business of training people, and independently of if they are going to be working as psychedelic practitioners or not. So I think that we need to take that into account as well. No? That the training has become a business.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for all that. Yeah, and yeah, there aren't too many places that you can legally become a psychedelic therapist, right? Because it's still legal in many places. So MAPS, Compass, anything that's going down that FDA approval route, that would lead you to a clinical trial, or once they get FDA approval, you have to go through their training. If you live in Oregon, right, that's going to be a licensable track there. So any any track that's licensed in Oregon, that will lead you to a career. But you have to be an Oregon resident up until 2025, and then I think it's opening up. But more places are starting to possibly vote. Right, Colorado has a vote in November on this, and so we may see stuff like that pop up quite often as politics, at least here in the States, are evolving, which is exciting. And what else was I going to say? Oh, I always like whenever I get this question too, because people are like, oh, should we take your training? Should we take another training? I always think, who do you want to learn from? Right? Like your theoretical orientation, what type of background do you want to study? And I think that's important too, right? Because it's like, okay, I really align with this person's practice and theoretical orientation, and this is somebody I want to learn from. But
Yeah,
every person
absolutely.
that I talk to that is breathwork trained, I think we all have that bias of it seems to be the gold standard to some degree. I didn't go through the official GTT training, but worked with very closely with Lenny and Elizabeth Gibson, who are GTT trained. But I think there is something to understanding that container without the substance before moving into working with substances. And I don't know from your perspective, but I also think that it's a little bit more activating at times in the breathwork circle. It almost gives you maybe more experience dealing with a lot of somatic manifestations and deep catharsis. And I feel like that training, that type of container is really great. And I've been thinking about it a little bit more since running our program and having experiential components of coming back to the breathwork framework. I think that is a really, really important way of working.
Yeah.
And again, kind of understanding it with not having a substance, having those foundational skills before going in there. That's going to make you a
Yeah.
better sitter, guide, therapist, whatever that is.
I think that the holotropic breathwork model has at least two very interesting aspects that the psychedelic field can benefit a lot from. The first of all is that, as you said, there is no substance, and that makes that all the result from the experience comes from within. One of the things that happens sometimes when we use substances is that we tend to attribute the benefits or the gains or the healing to the substance. It's like I healed because I took ayahuasca, or because Mother Ayahuasca healed me, or because MDMA did whatever, or because psilocybin resetted my brain. Yeah. So sometimes we attribute the power, we attribute the healing, the learning, the improvement to the substance. And in doing that, we lose some of the self empowerment that we can get from these experiences. Yeah. Same thing as giving the power to the shaman, to the facilitator, to the therapist. No, like somehow repeating this, if you want, patriarchal model, no, in which there's someone out there or something out there that it's more powerful than we are, and that's they know what we need. No, so I think that psychedelics work in a radically different way, and that's with the breathwork model. You cannot bypass that because there's no substance. It's you and your
Yeah.
breathing and your experience. Yeah. So in that regard, I think that it really gives this empowering and embodied knowledge. Like, okay, I know that people are going to heal themselves, or I know that the experience really comes from within, and my role as a therapist is just to support the experience. I don't have to introduce or to direct anything from the outside. I don't have to be creative with this. I just have to support whatever process happening there. That is one thing. And the other thing is that, as you said, breathwork can be very activating on a somatic level. I actually think I believe that breathwork can be more effective than psychedelics to deal with certain emotions. Yeah, things like
Yep.
anger, rage, the body, and the somatic part of traumatic events. That is worked very well with breathwork, in my opinion, better than with other substances, because it provides some sort of mental clarity that it's not distorted by the archetypal aspects that psychedelics can include. That makes us to allow ourselves to go easier into that. Yeah. So then that can be worked very well with breathwork, and it also teaches us we can learn how to support these traumatic somatic manifestations that can happen sometimes in psychedelic experiences, especially in high doses or when experiences go really intense. And then we do have certain background, certain training in how to deal with these very intense experiences. We've done with ICERS many workshops with ayahuasca practitioners all over the world. So were invited to their countries. They gathered a group of local practitioners, and we tried to support them. How could they increase the safety of what they do? Many people would ask us about the intense sessions. Like everything goes well when they can hold the space and by singing and managing the space. But when someone gets into a very intense experience with cathartic reactions and traumatic experience, how to support that? They seem not to have so many tools to deal with those situations, and I think that breathwork can be a really helpful tool for that. Yeah, and learning the paradigm can be very helpful. And actually, we did breathwork with ayahuasca practitioners, and they had a blast, really. So yeah,
Oh,
it
nice.
works.
I was going to say, get two types of feedback. That was awesome, and I can't believe you could get to those states with breath. And then the other, especially within the psychedelic world, it's so much work. I'd rather just ingest a substance. And some people hate it because it feels like a lot of work. But coming back to your points there, like I do find it. Well, I'll just speak from my own experiences where in my early 20s, psychedelics were kind of like, this is going to teach me everything. I'm going to heal. I'm going to understand, the answers to the universe, and realizing that I was doing a lot of bypassing. And it wasn't until I started doing breath work, those 2 points came up. It was, oh, whoa, I have my own sense of agency here. I'm doing the work. I'm not allowing this other thing to do the work for me. I'm doing this. And so that was really important. And I think especially when we're dealing with like certain things like trauma, right? We kind of give our agency up, right? The world is attacking us. We have like no agency over anything that we do to some degree. And to reclaim that, I think is really important. And I also realized, that second point where I was like, oh, whoa, I was able to deal with my emotions somatically instead of just going way outside of myself and trying to escape it. I was actually embodying that sadness, that rage, that anger that I haven't been able to really express. And so I think those are 2 really great points that you highlighted, and I would confirm that was my kind of turn on point for breath
Yeah,
work, going,
thank you
oh,
for
whoa.
sharing that. And I would add the third point is that the way that you learn in breathwork is very much like people used to learn a craft in the old times, no? That you learn from someone that has a lot of experience. And how do you learn?
Yeah.
By imitation, by working with them, no? So you spend hours and hours next to someone, and you were saying before, no, from whom do you want to learn? Who inspires you? No? So I've been incredibly lucky to learn with people that they are not famous. Their name is not going to appear in any Google searches, and but they are amazing facilitators, and they taught me to work, to do the thing. So I spent hours laying down on the mat with someone doing the body work, supporting people in different experiences, learning how to do the closure of the experience, how to prepare. So you learn by working with someone that you admire, that you feel that they know a lot. No, somehow the knowledge gets passed on from one generation of all the facilitators to the next. And I find that really, really beautiful. That here in the West we've lost a little bit, I think. So.
Yeah, I feel so fortunate that I've had my mentors, and same thing, just being able to work the floor that intimately with them and just like have that mentorship. You don't really find that in too many trades nowadays, right?
Mm.
And so that's definitely been really
Yeah,
special.
sometimes psychedelic therapy trainings are very theoretical, and this component
Yeah.
of human contact is lacking. No, like this learning from the person, learning by being inspired, by seeing the person work, by being directly mentored by the person. So I think that this is lacking.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think that comes like with the issue of scalability, right? So as you're talking about training being a business, thinking about this is going to be a bottleneck for the industry, right? If psychedelics became legal tomorrow, we wouldn't have enough therapists or guides to legally be able to do this. And there is that issue. It's like, how do we train that many people? But then as you build and scale, you're also losing out on, maybe that deep mentorship that you would get from smaller trainings. And so to some degree, it's like we do need, again, again, coming back to that diversity in the ecosystem, we do need all these training programs, because not one organization is going to be able to serve everybody. And, we need different approaches. There's, going to be a huge demand of people wanting to get trained. And there's going to be a demand once these start to become legal, that we're going to need a lot of therapists. And, I think the thing that a lot of people are also, I guess, some of their insights like, oh, whoa, this is really intense work. I don't know if I could do it full time. Right. And so to some degree, it's like being a psychedelic therapist probably isn't a full time job, to run sessions every day. Right. It's you're probably going to need a break and kind of do it part time. I always come back
Yeah.
to something my teacher said. I think he got this from Michael Harner, but he said shamanism's a part time job. Right. You go off and do your other thing, and then when somebody would need that healing, you'd come in and fill that
Yeah.
role. Maybe they were also
I
farmers,
had not
right?
heard that quote, but I really like it, and thank you for sharing that with me. Somehow it validates my feeling as a therapist. No, that yeah, certain things are not to be done full time. No, so yeah.
All right, Mark. Well, this has been awesome. I feel like we could just keep riffing, and then so many more questions to ask you. Anything that you want to close with, and also again, yeah, pitch your book. I realized we didn't, you know, specifically touched on it, but you mentioned it. So anything that you want to close with, and also feel free to chat about the book that you just released.
Yeah, so if people are interested in learning more about this integration model that I was talking about, you can find the book in both in English and Spanish. The beautiful editions. I have it actually here. So yeah, it's very very oriented for both practitioners and lay people. So I hope that you will find it an interesting read and useful in your integration practice. We are planning to launch integration training based on this model next year through the ICERS Foundation, and
Awesome.
yeah, we will make it. It's going to be in English, so we're hoping that we're aiming for September 2023. We're going to be launching that training. Um, yeah, yeah. There's my contact information that I provided to you, so feel free to contact me online and share your thoughts, your ideas, perspectives, and yeah.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you again, Mark, and thank you everybody for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you.